Has your water softener stopped softening the water for your family? Have you noticed that the water flow in your whole house has slowed right down because the media bed is so clogged in your water softener, either from sediment or from chlorine? Have you also noticed that maybe you're getting a really bad smell? It smells like garbage coming from your water softener. Well, it's time to replace the media, and I'm going to show you how right now. Hi, I'm Gary the Water Guy, and I simplify water filtration to help you conquer crappy water for your family. This video is for do-it-yourselfers or plumbers that want to replace the media themselves in either the water softener, iron filter, tannin filter, backwashable sediment filter, or backwashable carbon filter. The process is exactly the same. Now, a few things you need to make sure of, and that is, first of all, you need to know what kind of media you have inside your system. So my 27,000 grain water softener here, that's the one that we're going to be replacing the media in today. I need to know, first of all, what kind of media it is, and I know that it's a water softener media, but I also need to know how much media is inside there. And again, it's 27,000 grains. So media, for example, so media comes in a 1 cubic foot bag, that's 30,000 grains. So I'm going to need to take 10% of that media out of that bag before I put it inside here to make sure I'm getting the right amount of media. So some water softeners and definitely iron filters, etc., have a gravel bed at the bottom. So you need to know that. So you need to contact the manufacturer to find out exactly what media and how much of it you need to replace in your water softener or backwashable filter, etc. So again, if you have a 45,000 grain water softener, for example, you're going to need 2 bags of media, but you're only going to use 1.5 bags of media. So the other thing you got to keep in mind, you need to have a proper work area. So we're doing this in my basement. It's an unfinished basement. It's a concrete floor here. So I can work in this area no problem. But if you're working in a finished area, this is going to be messy. There's going to be water spilled and there's going to be media spilled. So it may be better to just drain the system, take it outside, and do the work outside if that's an option. Another thing you need to keep in mind is that there's freeboard. So that's a space above the media inside the tank so that when it backwashes, it can expand the media to flush all the debris to the drain. So you don't just remove the media and then fill up the tank. That's going to eliminate that freeboard, and then it's just not going to work properly. In terms of some extra supplies, if you're doing an iron filter, then you're probably going to need a new riser tube. Because you're probably the one that's inside there's probably going to be too dirty for you to reuse. You also want to use have some iron out or a powder that removes iron that you mix with water, and then you can put any components in there to clean them up. You're also going to need some painter's tape for when you're putting the unit back together, and you're going to need a funnel for putting the media into it. Okay, so I should add at this point that there's absolutely nothing wrong with this water softener. I'm just going through this process here today just to show you how it works. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to regenerate. So you hold down the regeneration button on this clack WS1 valve. And then it's going to start backwashing. Once it's gone into its backwash, then you can bypass it. And that will isolate the water softener from the plumbing, because we're going to disconnect it between the bypass and the unit itself. Then I'm going to grab a small bucket, and so because our drain line goes up, there's going to be a fair amount of water backwashing from the drain line. So if your drain line goes down, you don't have to worry about that. But in our instance here, so I'm going to press down and pull out this E-clip. This E-clip is what's securing the drain line in place. Then I'm going to pull it up and drain it down into this bucket. So as you can see, there's a fair amount of water that's coming out of there. Once that's drained out, then you can just secure this somewhere up here temporarily. And so make sure you don't lose the E-clip. So we'll set that aside, and then we'll pull out the E-clip from the brine line. And again, we just pull that straight out like so. And again, we can just set that aside. And again, make sure you don't lose track of the E-clip, because we're definitely going to use that later. And then you're going to want to put the valve back into service. And depending on how you're going to flush the water out of the tank, it's going to be much easier to remove the water if the valve is in service. So I'm just advancing through the cycles. So you can advance to the next cycle once it starts counting down. And we're going into the fill cycle. And we'll know that when we're back in service is because it's going to display the current time. All right, now, so we're back in service. So now what we're going to do is we're going to disconnect between the bypass valve and the water softener itself. So again, we're fortunate here because we've got a Clack WS1 valve. These are very easy to work on and very easy to disassemble. You don't need tools for a lot of this. So when we separate this, there's going to be some water spilled. So I've just got a little container here that I'm going to use to catch the water. So we'll just unscrew that and unscrew that. It wouldn't hurt at this stage to shut off the water in the whole house. That's what I'm going to do here now. I mean, because we've got it bypassed, there's not going to be a lot of water coming out, but it never hurts to be on the safe side, especially when we're dealing with water in someone's homes. So as you can see, we pull this forward and there's a bit of water comes out. And then we just kind of walk the tank a little bit forward. So if I turn this around so you can see a little bit better. So this is the inlet. You can tell here because there's an arrow going in, and this is the outlet. There's an arrow going out. So there's a number of ways that we can get the water out of the tank. You can lay the whole thing down and just let the water flow out. You can spin off the head, which we're going to do in a minute, and then siphon the water out. Like I said, there's a number of different ways to do it. I have some fittings that I use to pump the water out with a compressor, and I'll show you how that works right now. So this is what I use to push the water out of the media tank. It's just some fittings that I cobbled together. So this is the tail assembly. This is what we use to connect the water softener to the plumbing. I just put a short piece of copper there, and then I've just got some fittings so that I can connect my compressor to it. That's for the inlet. And then for the outlet, something very similar, same kind of fittings. And then I've just got a fitting on the end here that's going to attach to a garden hose, so I can hook that up and run it into a bucket when the compressor pushes the water out. So I'm just going to replace some rags on top here just in case some water blows out from the compressor. So as you can see, I've connected up the inlet and I fastened this and the outlet with the tail kit that we would normally use to attach the plumbing to the water softener, and then this goes down to a hose that's in a bucket. And so I'll just grab my compressor here and the rag. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hook this up here. I'm just going to pressurize it to get some water flowing through. So this was why you needed to make sure you put it back into service, because if you left it on backwash, the water would come flying out of where the backwash line connects. As we get to the end, it's mostly just air coming out of there. All right, so I've disconnected all that stuff, moved this out a little bit closer so you can see it. And so now you need to kind of hold the tank. I usually brace it with my feet and then push the valve to knock it loose. Now, again, be careful when you're doing this, especially if it's an iron filter or you have a lot of iron, because iron can be sitting in here and when it twists, you end up getting it all over yourself. I've had that happen. So then what you do is you just unscrew the head. Now what you can do is kind of whip it back and forth a little bit. Again, trying not to get yourself too messy. I did say this was a messy job, right? Remember that? Yeah. So once we've got it loose, then what you can do is kind of wiggle it back and forth to break it free from that riser tube and then pull it out. So as you can see, this is quite discolored here. Got a little cloth here. Quite discolored here. And remember, this is after an iron filter. So you still get a little bit of iron residue coming through, but the water softener also removes iron, so that cleans it up for the household. So you can clean that up. If this is clogged, and again, for an iron filter, it probably will be, then you need to grab this, unlock it, and pull it out. If it doesn't come out, and often they don't, then what you can do is you can just cut it right along here, and then with a screwdriver, pry out the part that's holding it in, and then you just put a new one on. So anyway, and then what you do is just set the valve aside, and then what you need to do is pull out the riser tube. So sometimes you need a little bit of help doing this. Pair of pliers. I'm going to remove the sweat jacket. So like I say, this one does have a sweat jacket on it, and that's for when you have it in a warm, humid area, that it doesn't sweat all over the place, obviously, and have mold on it. You can see this tank. I don't know if you can see it. I guess right at the bottom of your picture there. You can see this tank pretty much looks like new. It's not all covered with mold, and it's because it's had that sweat jacket on for many years. So see if we can pull out that riser tube. Not so much. If you can't get it out, then when you dump the media out, the riser tube will come with it at the same time. All right, so what I've got here now, I've got a bucket. It's actually an old galvanized steel bucket, and I put 2 heavy-duty garbage bags inside. So this is to hold the media. You need to make sure they are heavy-duty because the media is very dense. And so then what you do is just pick up the whole tank, turn it upside down, and shaking it around to get that media out. And the riser tube. All right, so the riser tube's coming out here now. Set that up a little bit. Whoops. And we'll just pull out that riser tube. Now, one thing you're going to notice about water softener media is that they're like ball bearings, and so they are. If you spill them on the floor, especially when they're dry, then someone steps on it, they could slip and fall quite easily. If you can't get it all out, and then what you'll have to do is you have to take the whole tank outside and flush it out with a hose. Okay, so I hardly got any media out just by dumping it over. So then what you need to do is you need to fluidize the media, and you do that with water, and it's once this fills up with water, it's going to flush the media out. I've got the towels down here because I'm hoping to hold as much of the media on the towels as I can. Well, you can see it coming out now. And you just keep feeding that hose in there. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to scoop up the media off these towels once I'm done, and put it into those garbage bags that I started with earlier on. So you can see it's just pouring out. Now, if you're doing this with a backwashable carbon filter, you know, like a carbon filter that's used to remove chlorine from a municipal water system, it's super messy. If you think this is messy, that's super messy, because that black carbon gets on everything, and it's greasy, and it's just a disgusting mess. Okay, so I never said that replacing the media was going to be fun or easy, and you probably see why now. Anyway, so I've flushed out the tank, I've washed it all out, and I've also washed the riser tube. It's nice and clean, so I don't need to replace it. But again, if you have an iron filter or something like that, you're probably going to need to replace the riser tube. And so then what you need to do is you need to use, I like to use silicone. I like to use painter's tape. That's what I like to use on the end of this, because we need to make sure that no media ends up inside the riser tube. So I put a piece of tape on the end, like so, and then another piece around the outside. And so if you need to cut a new riser tube, you have to be careful. If you've got the old riser tube, great, you can use that as a guide in terms of the length. Depending on the valve that you have, I believe with auto-troll valve, it has to extend beyond the edge here. I think it extends about 1/2 of an inch or 3/4 of an inch. With the clack valve that we're using here, it's flush. different valves are different specs, so make sure you check that out. But like I say, if you got the old one, you can use that as a guide. So at the bottom of the tank, there's actually a dimple in there. So you need to make sure you get the riser tube in that dimple, especially if you're cutting it from scratch, to make sure you get the right length. All right, so once you've done that, then you can use some, now we get the plumber's clear silicone grease, and we'll squeeze some out there, and we'll put that around the outside here. And so you can either put it on here, or you can put it on the O-ring. It doesn't matter what you do. And I'll just grab a cloth here. All right, so then you're going to need a funnel. This one's actually made for this purpose, but I mean, it's no rocket science here. You can take any kind of automotive or like gasoline funnel or something like that, cut it the right side so it fits. And so if you're putting gravel in, because that's what your unit calls for, then you need to put enough gravel in to cover the top of this basket at the bottom. That's how much, and they usually have a spec for that. It's usually something like 5 pounds or something like that. All right, so as I mentioned earlier, I don't need a full bag of resin for this size water softener. It's a 27K softener. So what that means is I had to take 10% out of this bag. It weighs 50 pounds, so I took 5 pounds out. And so now it's a matter of putting the media back in. And so you want to end up with the riser tube in the middle. And that's kind of why I'm moving it around a little bit to keep it in the middle. As it gets more and more full of media, it will just stay in the middle automatically. And so unfortunately it just doesn't fall in. You have to kind of move it around a little bit to get it to fall in to the tank. And obviously try not to spill it. And then we'll just pour the remainder in there. There we go. Shove it in there. Just going to put the funnel in here so it doesn't make too big of a mess. And then once you've got it in there, you can clean this up a little bit, like so. And you can pull that tape off. So when you're pulling the tape off, make sure that you don't pull the riser tube up. That's the last thing you want to do, is pull the riser tube up. And then you're going to put some silicone grease on the end here, like that. And then put the head back on. So feed it around. So, and then when you get it all the way on, I usually grab it with my feet and then give it a last little tighten, like so, and then we're good. We can put the jacket back on and get it back hooked up to the plumbing. Okay, so I've connected it up back to the bypass and put the jacket back on. I've got the E-clips here ready to go. So I'm just going to remove this drain line here from the iron filter. A little bit of water came out of there, just so that you can see a little bit better, because this is the water softener over here. So now what we need to do is we need to put the brine line back on. So one thing you need to do is be sure you don't mix these up. The drain line always goes at the front. They're the same size fitting, so just be careful of that. And so we've connected the brine line here. And then we're going to connect the drain line here for the water softener. And because these two drain lines are hooked together, whatever you do, don't try to, I'm just going to clean this off here. It's a little bit dirty here. Whatever you do, don't try to put it into backwash without reconnecting the drain line to the iron filter, because it would just come squirting out of that line. All right, so we just make sure all the E-clips are nice and tight. Okay, and they are. So now you're going to put the water softener back into service. So the first thing we need to do is we need to backwash it to get all the air out of it. So we just put it into regen. So I've got it plugged in now, and you can hear the regen is starting up. So it's still in bypass right now. I also put the iron filter in bypass too, just to be on the safe side earlier on. So now it's in backwash. So now we're going to open up, not all the way. We're not going to open up the bypass all the way. We're only going to open it up halfway. So what's happening now is the air is going, the water is going down through the riser tube, out through the screen, and it's expanded the media inside the tank. And what it's doing, it's putting water in there, but it's displacing the air. So you see the air is coming out of the drain line here. So it's an 8-minute backwash. So for about half of that backwash time, about 4 minutes, we're just going to have it open halfway. And once the 4 minutes have gone and we see that there's water flowing smoothly through without any air, you can see there's some gushes of water going through there now. Like I say, wait till about 4 minutes, and then after that you can open up the bypass all the way. Okay, so we're pretty much 4 minutes into it now. So what we can do is we can open up the inlet all the way, and we can open up the outlet all the way. There's nothing flowing out right now. I'm also going to open up the iron filter just to make sure I don't forget for later on. And then we're just going to let this finish going through its whole regeneration cycle. And then once it's done that, with this kind of water softener, it usually takes about an hour and a half. Once it's done that, let some water run to the drain. I always suggest you, I'll just turn this off for a second so it's not so loud. Let the water run to a drain somewhere. I always suggest somewhere like a bathtub or a laundry sink, somewhere that doesn't have a little screen, just so that any little minor small pieces of media in that get flushed out before you run it throughout your whole house. And then, so like I say, we're just going to let this finish up. Go here for your next video on water filtration for your home, cottage, or cabin, and I'll see you there.